Surround yourself with like-minded people, or not really like-minded, but ones that can challenge you. It's a very lonely game. Ultimately, no one else knows what you're going through besides you and your co-founder, if you have one. So if you don't have a co-founder and you're going at it yourself, surround yourself with some advisors, with some people who know your industry, especially if you don't know your industry. Surround yourself with people who are complementary to you. So, like, I don't have a marketing backbone, but I've brought on advisors to my company who do have that, who can help advise me where I lack.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7 and 8 figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Cam Howe, and as a quick introduction to Cam, so he studied chemical engineering in college, also joined the Army during the first year of college, interned with Deloitte, and then took a full time with them for a bit. And then after that, did a startup of his own with investor communications, moved into the world of finance and doing some banking work with institutional clients for a bit, and then had friends and family ask him for investing advice, which led to the business he's at today. So with that much as an introduction, welcome them onto the podcast, Cam.
Yeah, thank you, Devin. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely excited to have you here. So I just gave a very quick run through to a much longer journey. So maybe to kick things off, let's rewind and expand things a bit. So tell us a little bit about how your journey got started. You're studying chemical engineering and going into the or going into the Army or military.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I decided to study engineering in college. Quickly identified that I hated coding and never wanted anything to do with that. So I ended up choosing chemical engineering because number one, petroleum engineering was the highest paying job at the time. This was back in like 20 early mid early 2010s. And then on top of that, joined the military my first year university. Turns out chemical engineering is all about coding, and I actually had a knack for it. So I ended up expanding quite a bit upon that. And through my time, got more and more in the weeds on data science. So taught myself how to do some data science work. The capital markets in particular seem like the best place to trial all that out because you have a plethora of data to test and you can make money from it. So
Good
while I was
combination, making money and having a large data set works out well.
Exactly, yeah. So I ended up, yeah, I was an infantry officer during that time, but migrated over to Deloitte to do some summer co-ops in the analytics practice. So got to kind of put that a little bit more in practice in a more professional sense.
Hmm.
Um, and through my time there, I did identify I always wanted to go kind of into the finance world and leverage some of that data science background as more of a quant. So, for reference, a quant is someone who applies mathematical or predictive formulas to predict where the stock market's going to go to. So, after I graduated school and went to Deloitte full time, I quickly moved over to I'm in Canada, so one of the big Canadian five investment banks over here, where we essentially worked with institutional clients like hedge funds, asset managers, pension funds on helping them predict where we think the stock market's going to go to and how we view some of their holdings and their portfolios.
Hmm.
But I always had a little entrepreneurial knack to me. I tried starting a company up that you mentioned earlier during college and learned a lot from that. I learned number one that don't rely on other people to try to do the work for you. You really have to try to own it yourself. So that company ultimately didn't work out, but it learned a lot from it, and always knew in the back of my head, while this idea didn't work out, I have to go get some real world experience, and we'll end up taking these learnings and applying them to my next company.
So now let me maybe just to follow up. So that company started in or during college, the startup is alongside of pursuing the degree and do the military and then do interning. Did you continue it after college, or kind of how long did you pursue it, and then kind of what led to it not working out and or moving on from it?
Yeah, so it was funny because I had, with your summer co-ops, they end up giving you a full-time job offer X amount of months after you graduate school if they like you. So luckily enough for me, Deloitte did give me that. So I had essentially that school year and the summer thereafter to focus in on building a company. So I knew at the back of my head, I have 6 months to try to get something off the ground, and try to, at least to myself, prove out that there's a paying customer behind this. So I had about a 6 month runway. I'm like, I'm going to try to at least engage with enough people that really, the what we're trying to focus in on was investor communications. And what
Mm,
I mean by that is, if you're a young company and you get money from a VC or friends and family, they're typically going to want to reinvest in your company so long as you keep them engaged throughout that life cycle. So if I do a quarterly update to you,
mm,
um, you're much more willing to reinvest in me versus if I never communicate with you right after that money hits my bank account. So we were trying to alleviate some of that and essentially building like a CRM for your investor base.
mm.
And turns out there's a lot behind that. I didn't know how to do web dev at the time. I was more on the data science front, and tried using other people to help me along that path. But as I'm sure you're well accustomed to, the development life cycle can take quite a long time and can be very expensive.
Yep, that is always the balance of, having enough runway, getting enough features, getting it out there enough early, or getting people to use it, and also, meeting all the other demands. And so you were doing that. You're working at, or graduated, working at Deloitte. Also did the startup for a period of time. That didn't, or work out, but there, a lot of good lessons learned type of a thing. So with that, then I think after you kind of wrapped up that startup and also moved on from Deloitte, you went more into the finance banking world, and then
Correct.
did some work with institutional clients. Is that about right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I was on the research side of the business. So, yeah, working with institutional clients, helping them figure out what they should invest in. We would build out predictive algorithms to try to predict both where the stock market and aggregate's going to go to. So, like, where's the S&P 500 moving towards? But also on like an individual basis, what stocks look appealing. And, from like a quant lens, you can end up doing these things. They're called factor styles essentially. So, you might be familiar with like dividend companies. You can kind of bucket them into broad strokes like low volatility companies, high quality companies, ones that focus in on cash flow, value companies like Warren Buffett likes to invest in, or growth businesses like essentially a lot of the tech businesses. So,
Mm,
we can apply a bunch of different factors. We could look at like how profitable the company is, how fast they're growing, how do they trade versus their peers, and build out some models behind that. So that's really what I was focused in on. And then, kind of what I was alluding to before, my friends and family would always come to me, be like, "Hey, Cam, what's the inside scoop? Like, what should I invest in?"
mm.
And that's really where InvestAPal was born from. Was how can we help out these retail investors, these individual investors, figure out what they should invest in while still empowering them to do it on their own.
No, that makes sense. So now maybe one or follow-up question. So you were working, or in institutional, and is with banking in the finance world, and certainly understand you have friends, you have families and other people that are wanting investing advice and kind of wanting to know how to get started, and bridging that gap. And you have some of them that are kind of like, Robin Hood, which tries to, now they may have a bit of a black eye based on some of their history, but they were trying to, at least at one point, to make it more approachable for the novice investor. But as you were doing that, and figuring out how to build a platform that allows you to kind of people to get that investment advice or get direction, and people that are more getting into it, or did you start pursuing that alongside the full-time day job, or just say, hey, there's a great opportunity, I'm going to jump in both feet and go full-time? Or kind of how did you or start to tackle that, doing that business?
Yeah, so there was this friends and family always coming for help, but just like you said, there's the launch of Robinhood. There's the Wall Street Bets craze, where for those not familiar, there's a group on Reddit called Wall Street Bets, where essentially, there's a crowding effect. They would talk about stocks, and instead of just going and buying that stock or doing their own research to see if it fits within their risk profile, they would end up going out and buying deep out of the money call options, hoping, or puts, hoping that that company would end up making it big. So essentially, it's a lotto ticket. Am I going to make $1 million off of this? And it
Mm,
becomes very dangerous. So it's like, how can we try to, and really, you know, I'm not going to say too much on Robinhood, but what Robinhood came to the table with was making it very easy for you to buy and sell stocks. they were not in the business of making you a better investor. They were in the business of making you a better trader.
Hmm.
And the difference is that the trader is there for very short-term gains. You're hoping that like intraday within like, the one trading day window, you can make profit off of that. And they're making money off of, the number of trades that you're making through them
Hmm.
versus like an investor is taking a more long-term approach. I'm retiring in 30 years. I want to set myself up for financial success, for some long-term wealth. It's a very different approach on how you invest. So rather than selecting, in this case, like Rob, the Wall Street bets craze, like GME, like GameStop, it's more like, should I throw my money in the S&P 500 for 30 years, which is very boring.
Not
So
necessarily a bad thing, but it is much more boring, and there's not as much up and down, and not as much potential to make money or to lose money. So now I think you might have touched on it, but I'll ask or circle back to my question, which was, so did you jump in, full time, start this out as a side hustle, and then once you got it going, kind of give us an idea as where it's at today?
yeah, absolutely. So it the idea was created while I was still working within this job, and taught myself at that point to do web development. I learned from that previous startup. Again, like, let's try not to pawn this off on other people. Really need to own this. So taught myself how to do web dev. Started building the bones behind all of this, and then ended up quitting to pursue Investapel on a more full time basis. I ended up working at a startup during the that same stretch, so learned kind of the weeds on what a Series A, Series B company is all about. I've never learned from that, so got pretty in-depth exposure working with the founders of that company, while building my own business on the side. So that was a couple years ago. It was a bit slower to build Investapal, but we ended up launching our MVP about a year ago and opened it up more to the broad public in the fall of last year. I'm happy to report now we have just over 500 users, managing about 55 million through us. So these individuals are able to come through and kind of fulfill, there's a long pathway still to go here. We're still a very early stage company, but they're able to come onto our platform now. We help them build their own portfolio, and they can take inspiration from others and help and essentially replicate what their friends or other notable investors are doing.
Makes or sounds like some good initial traction, and makes or sounds like a good or good opportunity. So now you're looking at it and say, okay, and so when did you jump over, do it full time, or how long has it been in business, or did you say?
Yeah, so I when you work, you might be able to pull off like a side hustle if you're working in like a non regulated business. However, when you start to get into the realm of like competition and whatnot and competing against your own boss, like you have to take a step back eventually. So at that point in time, when it was getting a bit more real, it's like, hey, we've identified we have a market here. We've identified that there's a real need for this by not just people we've spoken to in my own network or in my co-founders network, but talking to real people out on the streets or real people who have signed up on a waiting list. It was at that point it's like, okay, we're on to something. It's time to leave the day job, and start really putting this out into the market. So that's really when we incorporated the company technically in October of 2021, but really right after I left the bank, but really took the time thereafter to build out the platform, talk to users, talk to individuals, digging deep on where they currently get their information from. So whether that be Reddit or StockTwits or wherever, and try to really build a platform around their pain points.
No, sounds like a good start and good opportunity so far, and or glad you're already getting some great traction on it. So maybe one follow-up question. So now maybe looking ahead just a bit, 6 to 12 months, where do you see things headed, or what's kind of the next steps for you?
Yeah, it's very interesting because they call it like the hockey stick growth in the startup world, which are you familiar with that at all?
Hmm.
Yeah, so it's like it's a slow growth, slow wins over time, and then like eventually you hit that like inflection point and things start ramping up. And it feels like we're right at that inflection point right now. We ended up signing our first partnership agreement. We're working on a few big ones as well that I'm very excited about. I can't say too much about it, but it's essentially like you've worked so hard for so long with seeing very marginal results, and then now, once you have a bit more market penetration, you have more brand awareness out there, you can start landing some of these partnerships. So that's really what we're focused in on right now. For a while, it's been on simplifying the platform. the ultimate goal for us is to enable anyone, regardless of your skill level, to invest on your own. And, the market that I used to work in would make it very complicated for those individuals. They wanted you to go to an advisor, they wanted you to pay for research. We don't want that. I don't think you need to. It's
Mhm.
unnecessarily difficult. So, we're trying to take a lot of steps within our own product to say, hey, where are we too complicated? Where can we try to dumb things down a little bit? So it's much more bite-sized. And no one really learns in school, whether it's in high school or even university, um, that financial literacy aspect. So can we start building up some of that muscle in people who come onto our platform? That's really what we're focused in on. And where do I see this in 12 months? I see us at 100,000 users who are able to not only build a portfolio through us, they're able to share it with their friends and family, and anyone, regardless if it's like your grandmother, your mother, or your best friend, they can all take inspiration from others on the site.
No, makes a good sense. And, I think that, you hit on kind of trying to simplify the user interface. And that's, as ironic as it sounds to make now you can make a crappy, simple user interface, but to make one that's easy to use, that helps you along, simplify, I think it's much times easier to make a complicated user interface that has a whole bunch of functionality, but it's hard to navigate, hard to use. And for most people don't understand what they're doing. And it's always that balance of, too simple, doesn't have enough functionality, too complicated, people get lost. And so they're trying to get that all of the features into a simplified user interface is quite the task as well. So sounds like it's been a good journey on that front as well. So with that, so now as we've kind of caught up to the present day of the journey and even looking a bit into the future, it's a great time to transition to the two questions I always ask at the end of each episode. So we'll jump to those now. So the first question I always ask is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made? What'd you learn from it?
Yeah, my worst business decision was not with InvestaPal because I think like you do a lot of learning throughout your failures. I have some friends who are founders as well. They ended up launching a podcast surrounded just around like the art of the fail, they call it, which is, what can you learn from your mistakes? And I think what I touched upon before with my last company was trying to rely on other people to do the work for you. When you are a very early stage company, everything lies on the founder's shoulders. Like I am the ultimate um, oracle essentially to the success of this company. As I scale, I'm going to transition more to a leadership capacity and hire a team around me to do a lot of those functions. But when you're just getting started, everything, success wise relies on you. And I found, through that initial company, me trying to engage other people was really where it started to break down. I think, I don't know about you, but like, when you're just developing the IP for your company, you're just starting the development out, if you don't have the know behind it, it's either going to cost you a ton of money or you're going to have to give up a ton of equity behind your company. And I did not want to do that again. And that's really where I taught myself, okay, I know how to do data science. I could probably teach myself that web dev side of things and took the time to learn how to build a web application. So I didn't have to outsource that work initially.
No, makes good sense. Sounds like a good learning experience and one to build on. So, second question now that I ask is, if you're talking to someone that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what would be the one piece of advice you give them?
Surround yourself with like-minded people, or not really like-minded, but ones that can challenge you. It's a very lonely game. Ultimately, no one else knows what you're going through besides you and your co-founder, if you have one. So if you don't have a co-founder and you're going at it yourself, surround yourself with some advisors, with some people who know your industry, especially if you don't know your industry. Surround yourself with people who are complementary to you. So like I don't have a marketing backbone, but I've brought on advisors to my company who do have that, who can help advise me where I lack. I think that's the one major piece of advice that like you have to bear a lot of responsibility running your own business, but uh, you can outsource some responsibilities and help cherry pick where you get that information from. So while I am ultimately the one who will create our own destiny around Investapal in our early days, I do need to surround myself with very intelligent people who can help shape the business in areas that I lack.
Mhm. No, I think that's definitely a great piece of advice. And, it is, I think, you kind of, as you hit on, I don't know that you need to surround your people or surround yourself with people just like you, because if everybody's just like you, then you become redundant.
Yeah,
But
it's
it
an
does,
echo chamber.
But yep, exactly. But it does make sense to surround people that will challenge you and help you to improve, or otherwise to or come up with new ideas, explore new angles, and otherwise improve things, and that have different skill sets. And so I think that's definitely a great piece of advice. So, well, now as we're wrapping up the episode, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above. What's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to go invest on your own, you want some help with that, you can check us out, investapel.co. It's the name right there. If you want to reach out to me directly, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, Cameron Howe, or my email is cameron@investapel.co, and we can help you get started on your investment journey.
Awesome. Well, I definitely encourage people to reach out, make a connection, utilize a great service if you're looking at investing. If nothing else, make a new best friend. So, with that,
Absolutely.
thank you again, Cam, for coming on the podcast. It's been a fun. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of your listeners that are out there, if you have your own journey to share and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, we'd love to have you. So, just go to inventiveguest.com, apply to be on the show. Couple more things as listeners, make sure to click share, subscribe, and leave us a review. Helps us to helps us to share these episodes with even more startups and small businesses to help them along their journey to success. And on that note, if you ever need help with your patents, your trademarks, or anything else with intellectual property or your business, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat. We're always here to help. Thank you again, Cam, for coming on the podcast, and wish the
Yeah,
next
thanks for
leg
having
of your
me.
wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Sounds good.